The crystal chandeliers gave the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Copley Plaza a warm glow as Boston's elite gathered to celebrate Miles Navarro's engagement. Blake Trennan stood near the bar in his tailored charcoal suit, which fit his athletic frame perfectly as he observed his wife Savannah working her magic across the room. Her flowing emerald dress caught the light as she moved between guests, ensuring everything ran smoothly. Miles approached with his usual grin, clapping him on the shoulder. Savannah really outdid herself with this party. I can't believe how perfect everything is. Blake's lips curved into a measured smile. He's got the best event planner in Boston on his team. He took a sip of his scotch, savoring the burn. How's the merger coming along? Thanks to your structural assessment report, we're closing next week. Miles loosened his bow tie. I owe you, brother. Thanks for having your firm handle the inspection. That saved us weeks of red tape. That's what friends are for. Blake's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at the screen. Speaking of business, I need to take this. Give me 5 minutes. Miles waved him off. Take your time. Claire's keeping me busy. She's introducing me to half of Harvard's Alumni Association. Blake stepped out into a quieter hallway. His footsteps were muffled by the thick carpet. The call was short. A potential client had a last-minute question about their proposal. As he ended the call, he heard familiar laughter floating from around the corner. It was Savannah's laugh, but something about it made him pause. Quick, this is the last time in public. Savannah's voice was barely above a whisper. Blake moved silently toward the sound, staying close to the wall in an alcove near the service entrance. He saw them. Savannah stood too close. She was close to Rick Callahan, her hand on his chest as she adjusted her dress with her other hand. The real estate agent's fingers traced her bare shoulder. Blake's jaw tightened, but his face stayed expressionless. His eyes flicked to the security camera mounted in the corner, its red light blinking steadily. He pulled out his phone and opened the hotel security app, a backup measure he'd insisted on when Savannah was planning. After the event, he tapped the screen 3 times to access the feed and saved the footage with another tap. He put the phone back in his pocket and walked away, his footsteps as measured as ever. When he returned to the party, his demeanor hadn't changed at all. Blake and Savannah called out to him 10 minutes later, approaching him with a champagne flute in hand. Her cheeks were flushed. Where did you disappear to? Miles was looking for you. I was on a business call, he replied. Her face showed she hadn't noticed everything running smoothly. She'd been busy, as usual. She leaned in to kiss his cheek and he caught a whiff of unfamiliar cologne. I'm just going to check on the kitchen staff before they bring out the main course, she said. Blake watched her walk away, his dark eyes following her movement across the room until she disappeared through the service doors. He took another sip of his scotch. The next morning, Blake was already thinking about what he was going to do next. He was sitting in his office at Trennan Engineering, looking out at the Boston skyline through the windows, which were covered in CCTV footage. It was playing on his monitor and looked really clear in high definition. He heard 3 sharp knocks on his door, and Melanie, his assistant, came in with a tablet. She was dressed really well, as always, in a navy pantsuit, and her auburn hair was tied back in a severe bun. 00 has been cancelled, but I've rescheduled them for next week. Is there anything else you need to know? Blake turned his monitor toward her, closed the door, and had a seat. Melanie's eyes widened as she watched the footage, but she maintained her professional composure. When was this filmed? Last night, Miles's engagement party. Blake's voice was calm and almost detached. I need you to do some digging on social media, email patterns, credit card statements, everything, of course. Melanie's fingers flew across her tablet. What exactly are we looking for? Patterns, other men, business connections she might have leveraged through personal means. Blake stood and walked to the window. Be discreet. No one can know. We're looking. Should I contact? A divorce attorney, not yet. First, we gather intelligence. He turned back to face her. How long have you worked for me, Melanie? 7 years, next month. In that time, Have you ever seen me fail at anything I set my mind to? A slight blush colored her cheeks. No, you know what happens next. Blake sat back down. His movements were deliberate. I want everything. You can find it on my desk by tomorrow morning. Pay particular attention to Harrison Klein. Melanie's ex is the investor she manipulated for contracts 2 years ago. Blake's lips curved into a cold smile. I think it's time Mr. Klein and I had a chat about mutual interests. Melanie nodded, already typing. I'll have it. All for you first thing tomorrow. One more thing. Blake pulled up his calendar and scheduled lunch with Miles for tomorrow somewhere casual. He told him he wanted to discuss the merger impact on local real estate. After Melanie left, Blake opened his bottom drawer and pulled out a leather-bound notebook on a fresh page. He began mapping out connections and drawing lines. Each pin stroke was precise and calculated. The next day, Blake sat across from Miles at a quiet corner table in Oak Lawn Bar. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the condensation on their water glasses. I've been hearing things about Rhett, Blake said casually, cutting into his steak. You should know. Miles sat down at the table, looking a little uncomfortable. Blake could tell he had some questions about his ethics. He took a measured bite of his steak, and Miles couldn't help but notice that some of his recent property valuations seemed a little creative. You've always played it close to the line, but maybe you're going a little too far, Miles said, leaning back in his chair. I don't want to see your merger complicated by association with the wrong people. Blake frowned, running a hand through his hair. You think I should distance myself? I think you should be careful who you trust. He signaled for the check, especially now with so much at stake. As they parted ways outside the restaurant, Blake could see the doubt in Miles's expression. The first domino was set, now it was just a matter of time. When Blake got back to his office, Melanie was waiting with a thick folder. Her eyes showed a mix of sympathy and something else, maybe admiration. She said, You were right about Harrison Klein? She started laying out documents on his desk. Blake wasn't the only one. He spent the next hour reviewing everything, the emails, photos and business transactions. Each page reinforced what he already knew. Savannah had built her success on a foundation of manipulation and betrayal. What are you going to do? Melanie asked quietly. Blake closed the folder with deliberate care. I'm going to teach them all a lesson about loyalty. His voice was soft but carried the weight of absolute. I'm going to make sure they regret crossing me. Do you want me to start looking for divorce lawyers? Not yet. First, we're going to watch them destroy themselves. The security footage played on 6 different phones at the St. Regis bar during happy hour. Blake watched from his corner table as Alyssa Morton's face went from confused to angry. The attorney's hands were shaking as she held her phone. Her perfectly manicured nails were digging into the case. She hissed to her colleague. That lying bastard. She told him. That's my fiancé with Savannah training. Blake took a slow sip of his scotch. His face was neutral as people in the crowd started whispering. It couldn't have been more perfect. Rhett was due to arrive any minute for his regular Thursday evening networking session, right on cue. The real estate agent strode through the door, his $1,000 suit and practiced smile failing to mask his mounting business troubles. Blake had made sure Victor Delgado's latest development deal had fallen squarely in the lap of Rhett's lap and spectacularly failed you, son of a. Alyssa's voice cut through the ambient chatter. She stood nearly knocking over her martini. When were you planning to tell me about your little affair? Rhett froze, his confident facade cracking. Alyssa, what are you doing? She thrust her phone in his face. I saw the footage of you and Savannah Trenton at Miles's engagement party. Red's face strained of color as he watched the video. His eyes darted around the room, landing briefly on Blake, who raised his glass in a mock salute. It's not what it looks like, Red stammered. We were just. Alyssa's voice dripped with venom. I'm such an idiot, she said, yanking off her engagement ring and throwing it at his chest. 2 marriages destroyed for fun. She took her engagement ring off and threw it at his chest. The wedding's off, and you can bet every law firm in Boston will hear about this. Blake pulled out his phone as the scene unfolded and sent a quick text to Melanie. Phase 1 complete. Contact Harrison Clean. 20 minutes later, his phone buzzed with Harrison's reply. Meeting set for tomorrow at 9 a.m. 1500 hours the next morning, Blake was sitting across from Harrison Klein in the investor's penthouse office. The older man's face was etched with bitterness as he reviewed the evidence Melanie had compiled. She played me like a fool, Harrison growled, tossing the folder onto his desk. She used me to get her business off the ground, then dropped me the moment she had better connections. That seems to be her pattern. Blake replied, his voice measured. What are we going to do about it? What are we going to do about it? Harrison leaned forward, his eyes sharp. What did you have in mind? I think it's time the business community learned about her ethical flexibility. The next Saturday at a charity gala, Claire Osborne caught up with Blake by the champagne fountain. Miles's fiancée had always been more perceptive than most. Interesting how quickly things fall apart, she mused, studying him over her glass. Savannah's the talk of Boston society, the next she's practically persona non grata and Rhett's reputation in tatters. It's almost like someone orchestrated it. Blake met her gaze steadily. The truth has a way of coming out. Indeed, Claire's lips curved into a knowing smile. You know, I always thought you're playing it too cool. I get it now. You're playing a longer game than anyone realized. I don't know what you're talking about, Blake. But if someone were playing such a game, would you be interested in being on the winning side? Hypothetically, Claire replied. If someone were playing such a game, would you be interested in being on the winning side? I always bet on the winner, Blake said smoothly. I have a feeling you're just getting started. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the entrance. Savannah burst in, her designer dress wrinkled, her eyes wild. Blake, she called out, pushing past startled guests. We need to talk now. He sat down calmly, taking a sip of champagne. We're causing a scene, darling. Let's go somewhere private. In the garden terrace, Savannah paced like a caged animal. What's going on? My clients are abandoning me. My calls aren't being returned. Everyone's looking at me like I'm poison. That's an interesting choice of words. Blake's voice was ice cold. Poison tends to spread, doesn't it? It contaminates everything it touches. What are you? She stopped, realization dawning on her face. The video from the party you saw, I saw everything. Savannah, not just Rhett, Harrison, Klein, Thomas, Bradley, Mark Whitman. Should I go on? She's backing away from her facade, which is falling apart. It was just business. I needed the connections and the contract, and that makes it better. His quiet tone was more terrifying than any shout. You thought you could manipulate everyone around you and never face consequences. Blake, please. Tears streak her makeup. It was a mistake. Rhett meant nothing. None of them meant anything. We can fix this. He pulled out his phone and pulled up the evidence Melanie had gathered. Photos, emails, hotel receipts. Savannah's face grew paler as she each swiped. There's nothing to fix, he said, putting the phone away. Your life is going to fall apart piece by piece. Your business, your reputation, your social standing, everything you built through lies and manipulation will crumble, and I'm going to watch it happen. You can't do this to me, she whispered. Blake stepped closer. His voice dropped to a deadly calm. I'm not doing anything to you, Savannah. You did this to yourself. I'm just making sure you pay the price. He turned and walked away, leaving her shaking in the garden. Through the windows, he could see CLA watching with barely Miles was nearby, still unaware of the full extent of Blake's involvement, but grateful for the warnings about Rhett. Back inside, Melanie appeared at his elbow with a fresh drink. Harrison called. He's arranged meetings with 3 of Savannah's remaining clients. Blake surveyed the room, noting how people subtly shifted away from Savannah as she stumbled back inside. Contact Victor Delgado. Tell him I'm ready to discuss his proposal about Rhett's properties. Melanie's eyes held a mixture of devotion and something more. Eager to meet Blake, he nodded. Everything was going exactly as he'd envisioned. The pieces were in place, The players were there, and now it was just a matter of watching them destroy each other while he orchestrated their downfall from the shadows. He had one more thing to say to Melanie. Make sure Alyssa Moore knows I'm behind her if she decides to take legal action against Rhett. It's time we turn this personal disaster into a professional nightmare. Alyssa Morton's heels clicked against the marble floor of the courthouse as she strode toward Blake. Her smile was shark-like. She handed him the divorce papers, which she had prepared with the same care as if they were a weapon. I made sure every clause is airtight. Savannah won't get a penny more than she came in with. Blake scanned the paper, noting the aggressive terms. Excellent work, he said, after what you did with Rhett. His eyes flashed. Trust me, I took particular pleasure in this. Speaking of which, I filed a separate suit against him for breach of contract and emotional distress. His legal fees alone will bankrupt him. I hear his real estate business is already struggling, Blake commented, signing the papers with his bland pen with each stroke. Was that really necessary? Alyssa laughed coldly. His reputation is in tatters. No one will work with him. It's like someone has systematically destroyed every business relationship he had. Blake's lips curved slightly. How unfortunate. Back in his office, Melanie laid out the latest reports on his desk. The anonymous holding company now owns 48% of Rhett's company stock. If we buy another share, we'll have controlling interest. Great timing. Blake pulled up a spreadsheet showing Rhett's property values dropping fast. Victor Delgado is ready to move on. Should I set up the meeting tomorrow at 9? It's 10 p.m. Blake got up and went to the window. Melanie, make sure Miles is there. I think it's time to bring him fully into the fold. The next morning, Victor Delgado's predatory grin matched the decor of his sleek conference room. It was all sharp edges and cold surfaces. Gentlemen, Victor spread his hands across Ross. The polished table. Let's talk about how we're going to divide up Mr. Callahan's empire. Miles shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I still can't believe Rhett's company is this vulnerable. He was on top of the world just a few months ago. The mighty fell hard when their foundation was built on lies. Blake said, opening his laptop. They carved up Rhett's business like vultures. Victor would take the commercial properties, Miles would handle the residential developments, and Blake, through his holding company, would assume control of the company itself. There's just one thing I don't understand, Miles said as they wrapped up. Who's behind the holding company that's been buying up all the stock? Blake closed his laptop. Miles' jaw dropped at the sight of the laptop. He was taken aback by the revelation. Why hadn't he been informed? To make unbiased decisions, Blake replied. Now that he had that information, he was offering Miles a partnership. They could rebuild what Rhett destroyed in a way that would ensure success this time. Miles' face showed he was starting to understand. This wasn't just about business. It was about Savannah too. Everything was connected. Miles' voice was firm yet smooth. Savannah R. was the business. They had all made the same mistake. They thought loyalty was the answer. They thought they could get away with it, but they were wrong. Miles nodded slowly. I'm in. 2 weeks later, Blake stood in the same grand ballroom where he'd first discovered Savannah's betrayal. This time, though, he was hosting the party as a celebration of his new business partnership with Miles and Victor. The room buzzed with Boston's elite, all of them eager to align themselves with the rising power structure. Melanie stood by his side, her usual professional demeanor softened by triumph. Quite a turnout, she observed, passing him a scotch. Success breeds success, Blake replied, noting how naturally she fit beside him. I think it's time we discussed your future role in the company. Her eyebrows rose slightly. You've proven yourself invaluable, he said, turning to face her. How would you feel about becoming a partner? A slight blush colored her cheeks. You're sure that's wise, given everything that's happened? The difference is trust. Melanie, you've earned it. His dark eyes held hers. I don't take loyalty lightly. Before she could respond, he continued. Claire Osborne approached, champagne in hand. Blake, you've outdone yourself. The vultures are circling what's left of Rhett's company. Savannah was across the room, flinching under his cold gaze, finally understanding the full magnitude of what she'd lost. Claire leaned in close to Blake's ear. You know, when this all started, I thought you were just another successful businessman playing it safe. I've never been happier to be wrong. Life's a chess game. Most people only see their next move. I see the entire board, replied Blake, his voice low. Her eyes were red-rimmed and desperate. Blake, please, she whispered. You've made your point. I've lost everything. Not quite everything, he corrected her. You still have your delusions. You still think this is something I did to you, rather than the consequences of your own actions. I made a mistake. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. A mistake is burning dinner. What you did was a choice, made day after day. It was a series of betrayals, followed by tears streaked across your makeup. I never meant goodbye. Savannah. Blake turned away. His voice was final. I hope it was worth it. He walked back to where Melanie waited. She was there, steady and loyal. Loyal, the room had shifted to watch their change, but Blake paid them no mind. He had orchestrated every moment of Savannah's downfall and every step of Rhett's destruction, and he wasn't going to waste another second on either of them. Shall we? He offered his arm to Melanie, who took it with a knowing smile. Where to forward, he said simply. The party continued around them, but Blake's victory was already complete. He had destroyed his enemies without throwing a single punch, dismantled their lives while maintaining his reputation, and emerged stronger than ever in his world. Betrayal carried the highest price, and he had made them pay in full.